I work for Cross Country Mortgage. I am the in-house lender here for those who have not met me yet. My office is right up front to the right whenever you come in the front door. I've been working with Cross Country, specifically on Sean Hadley's team, for about a year and a half now. Prior to that, I had almost 7 years of experience in new construction, sales. So I've been in real estate for the better part of the last decade. Went to Ohio State, I went through economics, and got into real estate straight out of school.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'm Mike Magno. For those of you who don't know me, I run a team with my wife, Diana, who's here in the room as well. What's unique about me and my business is I only work with investors. So we're investors ourselves, and then I take on all our investment clients. And Diana handles our retail side of the business. So it's a little bit unique. Not many agents do it as a complete business.
Well, for us on the cross country side, the lending side, focus on investment properties. We have some niche products that will fit investors that are outside of the conventional portfolio, but most investors are going to be, if they're requiring financing, it's going to be under that umbrella of conventional lending. I was going to quickly run through what the requirements are to qualify conventionally for an investment property, and then one of the signature portfolio products that we offer would be considered non-conventional, but a great product for investors if they kind of fit into that guise. Are you all right with that? I can kind of start it off.
Absolutely.
Okay. Feel free to stop me anytime with questions. I'm going to kind of fly through this. Investment options. So obviously, an investor could invest in a single family home, but especially in Northeast Ohio, people love the multi-units. For cross country specifically, we are kind of stuck to 2 to 4 unit residential properties. Anything that's zoned commercial is probably going to require a commercial lender. I'm going to guess if you ask Mike, refer you to a commercial lender pretty easily. Sure. For down payment, FHA is an option, as long as you're living in the property. So if you're buying a duplex, you're living in half and you're renting the other half out, you can put 3.5% down and qualify for an FHA loan. That goes all the way up to 4 units as well. Other cool thing about FHA is they'll allow you to take prospective rent to reduce your mortgage cost. So I can use 75% of what we expect you to be getting from the rent on the other units to offset your mortgage, which is amazing, and can have someone in a home much higher price than they were originally thinking looking at single family. For conventional, if it's a 2 unit that you're living in one half and renting the other half out, put 15% down. 3 to 4 units, those are going to be 25% down. If it's true investment property, you're not going to be living there at all. You technically can put 20% down on a single family, although the interest rates are going to be higher. I'd probably suggest putting 25% down. And then anything 2, 3, or 4 that you're not going to be living there, 25% down is the minimum. And that's all under conventional guidelines. We can use prospective rent from the property if you're an investor. You have a history of being a landlord. We can use that. Just to quickly kind of touch on investment rates. Rates are going to be higher than a single family primary residence. So if you're looking at the national average on rates, which is probably like 5.75 right now, they're probably talking about 740 credit score, single family, 20% down. When an investor gets involved, it's going to be higher. If it's truly an investment, you're not living there at all, you're going to have higher rates. More units is going to have a higher interest rate. There's seller concessions capped at 2%. So unlike a primary residence where you could get most or all of your closing costs covered by the seller, in this case, the closing costs would have to be pretty low for it to be covered entirely by the seller. You can't get a gift from a relative. It's really a little more strict to qualify for conventional lending as an investor. Now, most investors, they're aware of this, they've got the cash to get involved, and they're not too worried about, eking through the door just to barely get qualified. As far as funds to close go, we have some, kind of non-traditional, I don't know if you call it that. You don't necessarily just have to have money in a checking or savings account. We can, use your retirement accounts. You can borrow against your 401k. If you own other properties, we can refinance them, cash out, use those funds to buy new properties, or pull home equity lines of credit out to come up with some cash that can be used to purchase more properties. I do a ton of home equity lines. Someone in California has a primary residence. They've got a ton of equity. They are looking for cash to put on a new investment property. You might be sitting on exactly what you could be using without having to touch any of your retirement accounts, pay fees to liquidate your IRA, and the funds are there. They just maybe don't know that they are there to use. There are tax benefits to having rental properties. I'm sure Mike can go into that much more. One thing that we look at whenever we're trying to qualify investors is a Schedule E. That's a sheet on your taxes that is basically saying, here's how much rents you took in, here were your expenses, here's the bottom line, how much you made on this property. I can add a bunch of those expenses back in and actually show that the mortgage on that property, the other property that you have, is costing you nothing. So I don't have to count it against you. I could actually even over and above show that you're making money on that rental property. If people have enough, if an investor has enough properties that are showing over and above they're making money, I don't even have to show that they have a job or they're self-employed or anything. I just show that the rents are taking care of their current mortgages. They're making enough money to qualify for the next purchase as well. So that kind of gets me into this non-conventional product here. It is I can't remember what the acronym for it is. Yes, thank you. It is a investor cash flow. Do you do a lot of these? Are you familiar with them? Yeah. Basically, we're not showing that they have any income at all. We're just showing that the rents that they're going to make on this property are offsetting the mortgage. And as long as that ratio makes sense and fits inside the guidelines, we're good to go. Conventional lending caps investors out at 10 properties max, 10 mortgages in their name max. At that point, we couldn't do any more. This program will allow investors to go all the way up to 30. So it's an awesome product. It's going to carry a little bit higher interest rate, but that's really the only trade-off. And in this, in Northeast Ohio, most properties are cash flowing anyway. They're probably not even worried about
Good. No, that's great. Great information, Chris. So the stuff that I wanted to go over today was just as an agent, right? We're all agents here. Working with investors, very basics, and then if you guys want to go into investing yourselves, that's what you can do as well. I think the biggest thing for agents, for those of you on the call too, if you have any questions, can you monitor the chat? Yeah, so just throw anything in the chat and Gara will pull the questions. So the biggest thing I think for people is working with investors, like you were at, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Kathy.
Kathy, you were asking when you first sat down about what makes that investor of yours tick, what's that going to work? And that's where you guys need to learn the language of investing, right? You need to understand what a cash on cash return is. You need to understand what an ARV is. You need to understand what a cap rate is. You need to know what CapEx is, things like that. Because investors speak a different language than you do when you're selling residential real estate. It's just the way it is. It can be very complicated and it moves typically a lot faster because investors are making decisions just simply based on numbers, right? They're not looking at how cute the kitchen counters are. Do we have granite countertops? Do we have a tile backsplash? Do we have an open floor plan? They're not looking at those things. They're simply making decisions based on numbers, right? So the biggest thing I think for agents who want to get involved with investors is learning how to calculate a basic return on investment. And what that equivalent is will be a cash on cash return. So and the way you do that is you take the gross rent of a property, you subtract all the expenses, and that gives you a monthly cash flow. And then you take your monthly cash flow divided by the amount of cash the investor will have in the property. And that's typically down payment and closing costs. And then if they're going to add any repairs too. And then that gives you a basic percentage of what the return on investment will be. So
Is the monthly cash flow over the total amount the investor invests in the property?
yes. Yeah, so that's either called ROI or it's called cash on cash return. They're simply pretty equivalent terminology.
Beth would like you to say that again, like how you
Sure.
calculate that.
Sure. Yeah, so you take your gross rent income, right? So let's say it's gross income is $2,000 a month, and you subtract all your expenses, and expenses are PITI, so principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, property management if you're using a property manager, and then you should have some type of calculation for reserves. And reserves can be for maintenance, right? You're gonna have maintenance items throughout the year on a property. You're gonna have what are called capital expenditures. That's called CapEx, and those are large ticket items that you should be saving for. That should be your roof, your mechanicals, furnace, HVAC, plumbing, electrical. Those are larger capital expenditures. And then you also have expenses as a landlord as well. And if it's a multifamily, you probably have some type of utility expense, whether you have to pay the water, the sewer, trash. And then if you're into apartment buildings, even in like 3 and 4 unit buildings, you may have common area electric. You may have common area gas or heat in the hallways and stuff. So you want to subtract all of those items out, and it's left you with hopefully a positive number that's your monthly cash flow. And then what you do is you take the monthly cash flow and you divide it by what you have invested in the property. That comes up with a percentage. And that's a basic return on investment.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, a lot of investors that I work with, you were saying they're almost impersonal because they care about that bottom line number more than anything. And one thing to touch on with reserves, in conventional lending, you're actually required to qualify to show that you have those reserves. They're going to want to see Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the big banks that are eventually going to be handling this loan. They want to see through your qualifications that you've set money aside for that roof, that furnace, that AC unit. So that expenditure doesn't make your whole investment go belly up.
Yeah. So like I said, and then the other thing that's really important as an agent working with investors is understanding the basic repair costs, because the investor is going to ask you whether or not, if I need to get A, B, or C fixed, what is that going to cost me? Now, you're not a contractor, right? All of us are not contractors. So I understand a lot of people's reservations and sharing that kind of information. So my advice for those who want to start working with investors would be find some contractors, ask them basic questions like, hey, what's the average roof replacement costing nowadays in Northeast Ohio? Talk to an HVAC professional. I'm actually rehabbing a house right now, and I about had a heart attack this week when I got my quote back for the HVAC that I'm replacing, because the price has doubled in about a year. So I didn't realize the prices had gone up just so high. So yeah, a little bit of a sticker shock.
Yeah.
But that it just it's kind of part of the course. So understanding those basic things is going to help you go a long way. It's also going to show your client that you know what you're talking about. And this is not something you're going to learn overnight. I did not become I don't want to say go-to, but I've become a very well-known agent in the Cleveland market when it comes to working with investors. And it didn't happen overnight. I had to build that reputation, and in the last 2 years, I've sold over $25 million in investment real estate. So,
Wow.
that just, you will learn as you go. And I mean, I would encourage everyone in the room and on the Zoom to seek out, there's some great books and stuff. And maybe I'll give you a list of stuff that you can email out to everybody.
Yeah.
That are out there that would be great resources for people to learn this stuff. So.
Have you read, the Gary Keller wrote a book about
Sure.
investing? Is that a good
Sure,
book?
that's a great book. The Millionaire Real Estate investor.
Yeah,
It's the blue book. Actually, I brought a copy of it. Let me find it. So I brought 3 of the books that I love. So the Millionaire Real Estate Investor is one. Home, which was written by Steve Chater. And for those of you in the Keller Williams ecosystem, you should know who Steve Chater is. He's like one of the top agents in Arizona. He's been with KW forever. He wrote this book, Hold. And then another one that I love for investors is the Burr book, and that's where you recycle your money. It's the strategy that Diana and I use in our real estate investing. And we buy properties that we value add. So, and this book was written by David Green. So for those of you who don't know, David's a super top producer. He's in Gary Keller's top 100. He's based in San Francisco. So David's awesome, and he has a couple of other great books out there for real estate agents as well. So I would highly recommend those books. So.
When investors call me and they are asking about cash out refinance, they refer to the third book every time.
Yeah.
Have you heard this book? It's like, yeah, we know what you're doing. Let's go.
Yeah, and we can touch on that real lightly because I know a lot of people won't know the concept. So basically, what the Burr method is when you buy a property with some type of short-term financing. So that's either cash or hard money. You could use a traditional conventional loan like you could get through Chris if the property is in not terrible condition. And then there's enough margin in it for you because it's going to be more expensive that way because you're going to have closing costs, you're going to have loan costs. I mean, there's just going to be a lot of costs involved. And then what you do is you add value to the property by rehab. And then what you do after you rehab the property is you rent it out at today's market rents. And for those of you who haven't looked, the market rents, especially in the Cleveland market, have gone up exponentially in the last 2 to 3 years. And then when you get Chris involved is when you go to refinance the property. And the hope is that you refinance out as much money or more than you have in the project itself. Okay.
is that the money you used to pay the hard money loan
Yeah.
back, the
Yeah.
refinance?
When you refinance it, you would pay off your short-term money.
I did one last fall. Investor bought 3 properties cash, 50, 60,000. Good area, rundown properties, put a lot of money back into them, all duplexes, got them all rented out. You know, basically up the value to close to 150,000. Calls me, we refinance all 3 at the same time. All 3 refinances go through. He pulls tons of cash out of this. Now he's cash heavy. Now we're using all that cash to buy 3 more properties all at the same time, and all 3 of those closed. He doubled his portfolio
Wow.
in 60 days. We turned it around that fast. So.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest hurdle people get into in that strategy is getting the short-term money. We use cash or private money when we're doing projects. And then we use, DSCR loans, the debt service coverage ratio loans to then refinance money out. And honestly, I don't really care what the interest rate is because I've added enough value to the property that I get all my money back. And if you get all your money back and you're still cash flow positive, you have an infinite return, right? Like if you leave no money in a deal and you're getting cash flow every month that's over and above your expenses, then it's an infinite return.
Every investor I work with has that exact same mentality. So regular, Joes who are looking at maybe primary residence, or maybe this is their first investment property, they hear interest rates over 6, 7%, and they go, well, how's that possible? And then you show them the cash flow and they see, who's paying that?
Right.
Your renters.
Well,
you're making the money back.
yeah, the tenant is paying, the tenant is paying the debt service at the end of the day. They're the ones paying the bill. So, I mean, and you get, as the investor owning the asset, you then get to write off that interest anyway on your taxes. The other thing you can do is always refinance when the rates are more favorable. It's an easy way to increase cash flow on an asset is, a year and a half from now,
Yeah.
the rates will be better.
Right.
They have to be. I mean, that's the game that our government plays, right? when the Fed needs to juice up the economy, they lower interest rates. So, depending on who you believe, sometime in the next 24 months, the rates will be coming back down.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, like I said, this is the strategy that I employ. It's not a strategy for everyone because it's a delayed gratification. It can take 6 months, it can take 9 months, it can take a year before you realize your money back. We have a project right now that we're doing where we bought a duplex and we inherited bad tenants, and we're still in the process of getting one of the tenants out. So that's I had already, when we bought the property, I had hoped by now we would have already refinanced our money out. But unfortunately, we still have not gotten one of the tenants out. So it's certainly, like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. But in my opinion, and the reason I'm so passionate about investing in real estate and working with investors and teaching others how to do it is because it's really, unless you're going to inherit wealth, it's the only true way to build wealth in this country. Because property always appreciates, because there's a finite amount of resources that properties can be built. And as all of the agents on this call know, and the agents in this room know, we've been in a seller's market statistically since 2013. So unless the home builder fairies drop 3 or 4 million properties in our laps over the next 12 months, we're going to be in a seller's market. Yes, is this going to level off some? Sure it is. We're already seeing it level off a little bit. Sure. Are we going to see double-digit returns next year? Probably not. But that being said, we're still statistically we're in a time where in the short term it's going to level off. As interest rates become more favorable, buyers will get back into the market again, and all they're going to do is they're just going to pay more because the prices are going to continue to go up. They're not. This isn't going to be some catastrophic bubble burst like in 2009 when properties will cut, the values will cut. It's just not.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I could probably, do an hour-long speech on just interest rates, inflation, and where we're going to be in the next 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
But I would agree 100%. What I try and tell my investors, especially when they're first getting into it, they're very excited. They view it a little too much like a cash grab. They think they're going to find the diamond in the rough, turn around, and double their money in 6 months. I try and remind them it's an investment. Investments take time to realize. And when you're investing in something, you're not using the money, you're not taking your lunch money to put it into this. You're taking savings, cash, equity in other places, and you're hoping to invest it in something and realize returns that can then invest into more. I try to tell people, you don't buy this property because you're hoping for a windfall to buy a Tesla. That's probably not the reason to be investing in real estate. You're investing in real estate because you want to have a portfolio that you can retire on when you're 65. The approach should be more measured. Not that, some people want to roll the dice and see what they can do with their cash, and more power to you. There is a little bit of short-term risk. I think it's worth it in the long run for sure. One of the best investments you can make, even primary residence. For people on the fence, like, rates are a little high, get that property now. It's not going to go down in value. Start now and appreciate value into the future. That goes with investment properties and primary residence.
Yeah, those are all great points, Chris. Yeah, it's really good stuff. The other thing too that I'll bring up when you're an agent wanting to work with investors need a team, right? A majority of my investor clients they're not local. They don't live here. They're from California. They're from New York. They're from the Pacific Northwest in these really high, expensive markets. And they're amazed that they can buy properties in somewhere in this country for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, that cash flow, $200, $300, $400 a month. Whereas, for them, that's impossible in their local markets. So really the important things that investors need as a team. I know David talks about it in the book. It's called his core four. And that's a realtor or deal finder. That's a property manager. It's contractors, and then a lender. Because those are all of the most important things that you can bring to the table to the investor. You're also going to need home inspectors. You're going to need insurance people, because remember, those are all aspects of the transaction that the investor is going to need. So, I mean, personally, I've built a pretty good network of those types of people and folks to refer our clients to. So that's where I would challenge everyone who wants to work with investors. Those are things that you need to understand as an agent, that you need to build that team, because they're going to look to you. You don't want them just calling somebody willy-nilly off of Google and just finding somebody. Because they want to be able to trust you. And if you're going to build that relationship with them, and they're going to look to you. I just closed on 2 deals this week with an investor from San Diego. They've bought 10 properties with us since last February. 10. And it's because I took the time to learn about them and what their needs and wants were. And I set them up with all of the pieces, parts that they needed to be successful here in Ohio. And I mean, it's been crazy. They bought the first one, and then they got this bug, right? And they wanted to buy the next one. And it helps that they do it. You know, they do have the money to do it, right? But they are leveraging out most of these properties. They bought a couple with cash, and then everything else has been leveraged through, folks like Chris using loans to scale up. So, I mean, they're now at 15 doors here in our Northeast Ohio across 10 properties. And they also own 3 investment properties in California. And that was one of the reasons that they decided to come to Ohio, because in California, it's just not scalable.
Yeah, I've talked to so many Californian investors where they're losing money every month because the rents can't keep up with the mortgage costs. They're long-term investing into equity. They're hoping when they eventually sell the property, then they'll get a windfall there. Whereas here, you're getting equity and you're getting paid every month. So once that bug kind of got out there, the Californian investors were blowing my phone up trying to get into this market.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how much money is coming in from other areas of the country right here to our market. So, let's see here. I've got some basic terminology that I'll go through real quick with everyone. So if anyone has any questions, like I said, feel free to throw them in the chat. So when you're talking to investors, there are a ton of acronyms in this business that you'll come across. So I just and there's no rhyme or reason to my terms here. So I came up with a list as I was typing this up a few nights ago. So one that's important to investors is going to be ARV. ARV stands for after repair value. So that means what's the asset worth once I put some cash investment into it. It's also important for people who flip houses. Flipping is a job, is one thing I'll tell you. It's not an investment strategy, because at the end of the day, all you have is cash. You don't actually have an asset that's performing. So if you don't do anything with the cash, once you get it as a flipper, then it's not going to do you any good. And the tax implications are a lot greater on the flipping side of the business as opposed to reinvesting the cash. Now, we do flip houses, but we take that cash and that helps fuel our next project. So we're constantly reinvesting that cash into other things. So obviously everybody knows what comp means, comparable property. So when you're talking to investors and they want to buy a value add, they're going to want you to provide them some comps to so that they can understand what they're going to invest in, right? We talked about BRRRR, the BRRR. COC, a lot of times, is cash on cash return, or ROI, which is return on investment, which we've touched on those 2 things. I didn't really get into capitalization rate, and the reason I didn't is because cap rate is not really used in residential real estate. It's more used in the large multifamily apartments and stuff, and in commercial lending. So I didn't want to muddy the waters, but cap rate it's a fancier return on investment measure. We talked about CapEx, that's capital expenditures. So So other things that I like to talk about too is, you'll hear a lot of rules thrown around in investment real estate. You'll hear the 1% rule. Does anybody in the room know what that means? So 1% rule is, the 1% rule states that the value of the property, the rent should be at least 1% of the value. So if a property is worth $100,000, it should rent for at least $1,000 a month. That's 1%. It's an older school rule because as properties have appreciated, the rents have not kept up as much. Here's what I tell people when they're investing in Cleveland: if it doesn't meet the minimum of a 1% in Cleveland, then it's probably not. It's an easy way for you to just move on to the next property when you're analyzing deals. 2% rule, it's the same concept, but at 2%, which we really don't see in our market anymore. 5 years ago, yeah, you could hit 2% here in our market. It's really not achievable here anymore, unless of course you buy something that's in a pretty bad part of town or it's really undervalued. 50% rule. The 50% rule is half of the rent, no more than half of the rent should be towards expenses. So those are some of the rules that people talk about. What else? STR, for those who don't know, short-term rental. I know some people doing some crazy things with short-term rentals in Cleveland. I haven't really looked into it much myself. Short-term rentals they're a job to me. They're very management intensive. Now they do make more money.
Is that like Airbnb?
Yeah, like an Airbnb or a HomeAway or a VRBO or midterm rental. A lot of people are doing furnishedfinder.com in Cleveland, where they rent to like nurses and construction people. So there's a lot of people coming in for just 3 or 4 or 5 months at a time. So LTR is long-term rental. So that'd be something that's going to be a year lease or longer. We mentioned leverage. Leverage is generic for mortgage, basically. When investors talk about leverage, it means they're leveraging their money, right? They're going to borrow 30, they're going to borrow 70, 75%. They're going to leverage out their money to buy an asset. PITI, that's your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. I mean, as a real estate agent, if you don't know that term, then we need to have another conversation. FMV is fair market value, similar to ARV. It's just some of the terms you may run into. HM or HML is hard money loan. And then the last one I threw in there, which is a little bit out there for people, is a 1031 exchange.
That's on my list.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on it real quickly. If people have questions, they can email me about it. I can talk about it. But a 1031 exchange. 1031 stands for the tax code in the IRS's tax code, where you can sell an investment property and then reinvest all of the gains tax deferred. And you can continue to do it until you die. So I've helped many investors use that strategy to, exponentially grow their portfolios.
It has to be into a like property though, right?
Well, any investment property is considered like. You could sell land that you were leasing for a farmer and then turn it into a 30-unit apartment. They're both investment vehicles. So the IRS considers that to be like.
So a condo, if you invest in a condo, you can put the money in a house.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have to. There are some very specific rules to a 1031 exchange, and like I said, I could do 2 hours on that. But what I'll tell you is, to do a proper 1031 exchange, the property has to be an investment property. So therefore, it can't be a flip, right? So that's number one. Can't use it on a flip. It has to be some type of investment property. It could be land, it could be an apartment building, it could be this building that we're sitting in. It could be any type of investment property, and then you sell it, and then you have to reinvest all of the money into the next property to realize no capital gains.
But there's time.
And there are timelines. When you sell the property, that's the property that you're exchanging. You have 45 days to identify the property that you want to buy or properties you want to buy. You don't actually have to buy the property that you have identified either, but you only have up to 180 days then to close. So it's very difficult if you are doing it on a large scale commercial, because commercial deals take a long time to close. It's really useful in the residential side of the business because the timelines are so much shorter.
Yeah, we work directly with investors on these 1031 exchanges. You know, we'll work with the man, because there's a third-party management company for the 1031.
Yeah.
They, you know, most of the time, the investor has a very good idea of how much money's in there, but there are a lot of forms and a bunch of stuff as the lender that we'll need. We go directly to the manager of the account and get all of that from them. So it's a little bit less headache on the investor. A lot of the time, those timelines are extremely important. So, you know, we're kind of up against the clock, especially if they're having a hard time finding a property. But yeah, I mean, it's an amazing tool that if you're investing in real estate, especially, you know, moving on from your first set of properties to your kind of next set of properties, a tool that you absolutely have to use to avoid capital gains tax that could kneecap your investments.
Yeah, I have a client that's based in San Diego, and he sold a property in San Diego in 2020, and he converted that property. We bought 6 properties in Cleveland with the proceeds.
I did the same thing for a California investor. He had a house in 2 houses in California that were not cash flowing. He wanted to reinvest here in Cleveland. Sold those, moved them into the 1031, and then we bought 4 properties here in Cleveland over a couple of months.
Cool. So, I mean, I don't really have anything else that I wanted to cover this morning, so I'll open it up to questions. If people have questions, or first, do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I mean, you know, I could get more into the financing, but I think it's easier if anyone has any questions to let me know, and I can get a little more in depth. But yeah, this is all good stuff. I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions
Questions?
online?
Any questions from the Zoom?
I have a question.
Sure.
This isn't technical though. What do you, well, I mean, you've got so many investors. What do you do with an investor who asks you for stuff and you give it to them and then they don't get back to you? It's like you're wasting your time with them.
So that's a great question, right? And this is a problem in our industry, right? As agents, we oftentimes do not set expectations with people. So what I do personally is I do a consultation with these people and I lay out my expectations. And if those expectations don't work for them, or what they're looking for doesn't jive with my expectations, I choose not to work.
Can I ask what your expectations are?
Well, what I basically do, especially if it's an out-of-state investor,
Yeah.
I really require them to go through the process of at minimum getting pre-approved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they need to get a local lender or someone who's in Ohio, because they may live in California and maybe they got a buddy who's who's a broker in California, but they're not licensed to sell them off. They're not licensed to do loans in Ohio. Plus, obviously, you want them to work with who you have, right? Because I know the deal's going to get closed, right? I think that's why I have my core of people, and I guard them with my life, because I know if I refer you to those people, that deal, we're going to get that deal to the closing table, right? So that's my biggest thing, is understanding the acquisition strategy. If it's going to be through leverage, then we need to have that conversation about the type of leverage you're going to use, what your price points are, type of strategy, the type of returns that you're looking for. Secondly, I usually, if they need introductions to property managers, I have a couple property managers that I refer people to. It really just depends. From there, they typically will have questions for me. Me personally, I don't run around looking at properties.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I won't do.
Yeah, I don't go.
Yeah, because here's the thing, we have to make decisions based on numbers, and this market moves so fast that I tell people up front, like, hey, by the time I can schedule to go look at a property and make some kind of video tour with you, the properties are gone, right? So we'll gather every bit of information that we can from the listing agent, from the seller, from property records, from previous listings. and then we'll make a decision, right? We'll have to make some assumptions in our math. And if the assumptions are good, get the darn property under contract. Because you've eliminated all the competition at that point, right? But you have to understand as an investor, you have to make quick decisions, right? And in your case, if the guy is not making quick decisions, he's not motivated. Would be what I get at.
So I should have a come to Jesus meeting with him and say, look, if I'm gonna be doing all this research for you, you're gonna need to get back to me.
Yeah, because I mean, if they're clearly not getting back to you, then they're just not.
I mean, it's like 2 or 3 days
Yeah,
later, and that's,
that's
yeah.
acceptable. Yeah, he's looking, he's a tire kicker. He's not actually looking for the best. You know, he's probably also thinking the market's gonna crash by 30%. And it's not. It's not. So, yeah, so like I said, for me, you just have to set all those expectations up front. It will take some tweaking as you go, you know, because when I first started working with investors, I did whatever I had to kind of like build that confidence and have them confident in me and close deals. And then when your deal funnel becomes so large that you can be a little bit pickier, that you can kind of pick and choose who aligns with you too, right? If someone calls me and they want to buy $30,000 properties to flip, I'm not their guy. I'm not running around for $30,000 properties. I really never did, but I'm just not, it's just not gonna do it. So.
What's your minimum?
I don't really have a minimum. It depends. I have a minimum commission, $2,500. So.
To note on that, before I forget, there are high price loan limits within, federal compliance guidelines.
Yeah.
Basically, cross country, for example, we charge a flat rate processing and underwriting fee. If you have a really low loan amount, say $45,000, our flat rate fee is going to be too big per federal guidelines. So we have minimums. Now we'll play it by ear. Sometimes we can make it work. If the points aren't too much, if the investor's not trying to buy the rate down a ton, we're fine. We don't trip into those compliance guidelines, but generally we say, a loan amount of $75,000 is going to go through no problem. When you get less than that, we're gonna have to take a look at it. Anything less than $50,000, very likely we're gonna have some trouble. So I get a lot of calls from people that are like, hey, I want to finance this $50,000 house. Well, put 25% down. All of a sudden, it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah, I would encourage anybody who's on the call in the room that is working with someone that wants to finance that low loan amount. Find some type of hard money person, bridge, or private money. So, and I've got people that if you need that, feel free to reach out to me by email, and I'll make an introduction. Because when you're borrowing money from hard money people, they don't have any rules, right? They make their own. So they can do whatever they want.
What is your email?
That's Michael. It's at themagnogroup.com.
Can you spell Magno?
Magno. But yeah, if you have any questions that we didn't cover today, that's really about it. I mean, the only other things that I would tell, the agents and stuff on here to learn, there's some really great podcasts out there in the world for new agents or agents who are wanting to get into working with investors. I would recommend Real Estate Rookie. That's a podcast about what it sounds, Real Estate Rookie, investing, being a rookie investor. The original Bigger Pockets podcast is out there. There's 600 or so episodes of that. That's been around for 10, 12 years. There's one called Doors to Deals. And I'll kind of pimp myself out. I was actually on that podcast. I recorded it back in March, but it just came out in July. It's hosted by a couple of Keller Williams agents that are based in St. Louis and Illinois. They run a pretty large team out there. A guy by the name of Jim Manning and Caleb Davis. They're doing some really great innovative things. They've got syndication, they've got all kinds of stuff going on. So they've got a really great podcast. There's one called Millionaire Tribe out there. That's a pretty good podcast. You talk about books. There's a million books out there to read. And then the other thing that you could get involved in, it would be a RIA. A RIA is a Real Estate Investment Association, REIA. Those are just groups that meet. There are RIAs that cost money to be a member of, and then you go on Facebook. I mean, there's a million groups out there that meet that you could go and network with people that are like me that concentrate on selling investment real estate and investing in real estate. So.
Yeah, a lot of investors I work with, they're a part of some big national group where they openly discuss, what investment strategies they're doing, markets they're getting into. I always think that that's why we had such a blow up here in Cleveland is few investors got the, word that, they were starting to move in here, and then everyone caught on that, wow, this is a great market to invest in. So.
Yeah, there's, I mean, I get 2 or 3 calls a week from people who find me online, and they're fascinated with the Cleveland market. If you search great real estate investment markets on Google, we're on every list. I mean, seriously, on every list of the top 10 markets in the country to invest in. It may not always be that way because the more people come here, drives the prices up, the rents don't keep up, the investments aren't as sound. However, you just have to kind of figure your strategies out if you need to. But.
Yeah, it might be a good time to invest personally, because if this keeps up in the way that it has in the last couple of years,
yeah,
it's property values are going to continue to grow.
And there are still there's still a lot of tracks around Cleveland that need investment too. So I still think we've got a long time to go before Cleveland and surrounding areas have completely been gentrified again. There's still plenty of neighborhoods that are still on the come up. Because that's what naturally happens, right? As investors infiltrate one neighborhood and they raise the property values up exponentially, they have to find the next place to go. And those areas that you go to are typically the ones that are on the edges of those neighborhoods, right? As they start to what we call transition into other parts of neighborhoods, and you just gradually see the money kind of flow that direction. So, and at the end of the day too, it depends on what the investor wants. If the investor wants appreciation and cash flow, then they're going to want to look at higher priced markets, higher priced assets, maybe even suburban locations. If they want strictly cash flow, then they want to look at more inner city type stuff. Cleveland proper, Akron proper, Lorraine's seeing a renaissance, Elyria, Canton, and all these areas are really seeing that too. So
yeah. One of the best cash flow areas for a lot of investors that I work with is Cleveland Heights. As funny as it sounds, taxes are high, property values are pretty high. I mean, you've got to come up with a good amount of cash to get in there. The rents though are crazy. You could have a duplex with a attic it's almost like a auxiliary third unit accessible from the outside, and you'll see rents of like more than $3,000 per month on these properties. It's crazy. Now you probably had to buy it for $225, which is a big investment, but it's a market where we've seen some people really target that area. They have a lot of cash they want to throw around, and the rents are wild.
What do you think of South Euclid, Lyndhurst, and Shaker Heights?
Good question. Personally, I don't like areas with point of sale.
What areas don't have point of sale?
Well, it depends. So I do a lot of my own personal investing is all in Summit County. And there's no point of sales anywhere in Summit County except for well and septic. But I won't purchase properties that are investments with well or septic. So once again, my buy bucket is a lot different than a lot of people, right? And that's where each individual investor is going to have their own buy bucket. So overall, Shaker Heights has one of the worst point of sale situations to deal with. So personally, I think I've only sold 1 or 2 properties in my entire career in Shaker. Once I explain to most investors what that looks like, or I'll send them a current point of sale inspection on a property that's on the MLS, and they look at it, they're like, that's not a city I want to invest in. They don't want to deal with the bureaucracy of the city.
What do you think of Maple Heights and Garfield Heights?
Once again, they also have,
They have POS, because that's where my investors.
yeah, they have point of sale, they have annual rental inspections, they're not as landlord friendly. Can you make money there? Yeah, absolutely. You can. I have a property listed right now in Garfield Heights. It's a duplex. There can be money made anywhere, right? It becomes what you're willing to tolerate and what you're willing to put up with. Some people like the point of sale because they feel like that's going to help protect the property values because the city requires these repairs to be done. However, as someone who has worked in those communities, I flipped a house in Cleveland Heights one time. Like it's in my opinion, it's overreach on the city. It's overreach.
Do you have specific places in Summit County you would recommend?
I look all over.
Just look all over.
Wherever I feel like I can make money. Because at the end of the day, that's my ultimate goal, is to build my wealth through investing in where I can make money. So whether it's, and I grew up I grew up in Akron. So, I mean, I know those neighborhoods like the back of my hand. Not that I don't live in neighborhoods as well. I sold over 60 properties last year in Cuyahoga County alone. That's my personal buy bucket. So it's where I like to be. There's a comfort zone there for me. Plus I have my team there. One of my best contractors, he lives in Talmadge and he's not leaving his little bubble. And you'll run into that too. That's the other, the biggest area of weakness in everyone's team is always the contractor piece. So like when you find a good contractor, you got to hold on for dear life. So like my guy, he's not leaving his little bubble. So I have to invest where I know it will work, right? So that's what I do. Yeah, I mean anything with heights in the name up in Cuyahoga County, it's got point of sale. Everything, except for the exception of Bedford outlawed point of sale. So, Garfield, Maple, Warrensville, South Euclid, if it's a rental property, has point of sale. Euclid has point of sale. East Cleveland has point of sale. Cleveland Heights has point of sale. Shaker Heights has point of sale. Newburgh is the worst. Don't ever step foot in Newburgh anymore, in my opinion.
I just sold one there. And that it wasn't rental, it was to live in, and it's been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Half their.
They make up the rules as they go.
Well, I guess half their staff quit, like they walked out in one day.
Yeah. I mean, that's a long conversation for another day. But yeah, I mean, all of those communities all have point of sale that you have to deal with. So it's, at the end of the day, it's up to the investor whether or not they want to deal with it. As an agent, I'm not a big fan of it. Because it's just more hoops you have to jump through as an agent. And remember, we're not selling $1 million. We're not selling $1 million properties either. My average sale price last year was like 70. So it's not gigantic properties.
Yeah, we just had a point of sale kill that deal because of all the cement work on the sidewalk, on the garage, on the shelf.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see it. But yeah. And that's, those are some of the things you have to deal with as an agent or investors in these point of sale communities. So, the other thing too that I'll point out, I know Chris mentioned it real briefly when talking about Cleveland Heights, the taxes. Look at the tax bills over there. And here's the thing I tell investors when it comes to taxes, it never goes away. And they only go up, right? So unless it's a smoking deal, it might not be worth it. You're talking for a nice Cleveland Heights duplex, the tax bill is going to be somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 a year. And you can buy that same duplex on the west side of Cleveland, and the tax bill is $2,800 or $3,200. So you just increase your cash flow by $3,000 a year by just looking at different parts of town. So, but that, to his point, the rents are much higher in Cleveland Heights than they are gonna be in, say, the West Boulevard. Rents are gonna be exponentially higher in Cleveland Heights.
That's one of the shocks that even Californian investors, I talked to a guy in California not long ago. His taxes were less in California on his primary residence than that investment property he was looking at in Shaker Heights.
Right.
And he couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
we got upset on it.
I have several investors in California. They all say the same thing. Our property tax rates are very high here compared to other parts of the country. The problem is our income, everything else is so much cheaper here. So I tell it to investors all the time, like, yeah, but you're paying $8 a gallon of gasoline. Like, we have to generate revenue other ways. So property taxes are one of the ways that these communities generate revenue, right? Whereas, if you go try to, the income tax rate in California, I mean, they're paying like 50%. We're not paying 50% taxes here in Ohio. So there's that give and take. So that's why property taxes is always something you have to be considerate of, because that's a bill that never goes away. Even 20 years from now, when the property's paid off, you still have a tax bill. Right? You still have a tax bill. So.
One thing for POS, I just wanted to mention, not all lenders do this, some do, cross country does. This is for primary residents, this is for investors. We can escrow those. If the buyer is going to assume the POS, we can escrow those funds and move it through closing without having to have the repairs done. So there's some catch with it. We have to go through approval. You have to get quotes from contractors, because we're going to need to know how much to escrow. But just so you know, if you run into that issue, it's blowing up the deal, we may be able to save it by putting some of those funds in escrow and pushing it through. They'll still need to fix it down the road. The city will bug them about the inspection, but it might not hold up the closing.
And the cities all have different timelines as to when the repairs have to be done. So, and that's going to be very specific to each community. I would just let everyone know that. So. Kara, is there any other questions in there?
I don't see any in the chat. Anyone online? Journey, Ken, Beth, do you guys have any questions?
No, I'm good.
You said no. Beth said no.
Okay. Cool.
Alrighty. Thank you guys.
Well, that's all I got for today.
This was really good.
Cool.
Thank you, very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Awesome. I will put the recording out there too.
All right, quick.